Welcome to our podcast series on diversity and inclusion, brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading independent professional body dedicated to promoting best practice and raising the standards of coaching worldwide. I'm Dr. Alexandra Morgan, Senior Lecturer and Coach Educator. In this series, we're privileged to be talking to a superb range of coaches and consultants whose work is making a significant contribution to advancing diversity and inclusion in society and in the coaching profession. We hope this series sparks curiosity and encourages change. So hello everybody, I'm Alex Morgan and we're continuing our series on diversity and inclusion. And with me today I have Toby Mildon. Hi Toby.
Hey Alex, lovely to meet you.
Yeah, lovely. Likewise, and great to have you here. Thank you for joining us today. So Toby, you're the founder of Mildon and you call yourself a diversity and inclusion architect, I believe.
I do.
So tell me, what does inclusion mean to you, Toby?
For me, inclusion is about making sure that nobody's left behind. So in the context of employment and working within businesses, which is who I predominantly work with, it's making sure that everybody has an equal opportunity of getting into your business. But once they are within the business, they have an equal opportunity of progressing and advancing and thriving and being able to do their best work.
Fantastic. And when we talked briefly earlier, you were telling me that diversity and inclusion have moved up the business agenda. So can you tell the listeners a little bit about why you think that's happened?
Yes, over the last couple of years, a number of things have happened that increase this topic on boardroom agendas. We saw the murder of George Floyd over in the States a couple of years ago and how organizations responded to that for their employees and a focus on becoming anti-racist organizations. We've also seen a disproportionate impact of the pandemic on particular groups of our community. So we've seen an increase in women leaving the workplace because of the pandemic. We've seen a disproportionate impact of the pandemic on people of an ethnic minority background as well. And that's caused businesses to really think about their role in society and how we can create a fairer, more equitable society.
Yeah, I know this is obviously a subject very close to your heart. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and your career?
Yeah, so I was born with a rare neuromuscular disability called spinal muscular atrophy, which means that I require around-the-clock care. I use an electric wheelchair to get around. I can't lift my arms, so people have to help me with everything from feeding me to taking me to the toilet, for instance. I've had my own experiences of trying to get into the workplace and coming across my own obstacles and barriers, but I've had a really great career. After university, I spent the first half of my career working in technology. I was an IT consultant for Accenture. I worked in healthcare technology. I worked at the BBC as a technical project manager on iPlayer and the BBC News website, which then led me into diversity and inclusion because I was working in the technology department with the chief operating officer and helping him with the senior leadership team look at gender balance within technology. So the technology department at the BBC, when I was there, was skewed towards men. It was only about 14% of our workforce were women. So we wanted to get more women into technology, and then it took off from there.
Obviously, as a woman and with daughters in STEM, I'm grateful for the work that you did around that. So thank you, Toby. Tell me, at the beginning of your career, these big companies that you work for, how did they include you and what actions did they take that helped your career?
There's a number of good examples. I think I like to go back to the beginning. I was about 15. I was really eager to get into the workplace. And that's when I came across my first examples of kind of rejection or exclusion. So my friends were getting jobs stacking shelves in supermarkets, which I couldn't physically do, but I knew that I could do an office job. So I was trying all these kind of local businesses, like an estate agents, for example, and I was getting these rejections. And for me, it was more than just a simple rejection. There was something else going on. And in hindsight, it was a case of discrimination or anxiety or fear about having somebody with a disability in their office. But then I went into the local branch of Lloyds Bank and I made an appointment to speak with the bank manager who thought I was going in to open up an account. But actually, I was asking him for some work experience.
Nice move. I like
Yeah.
it.
And to my surprise, he said yes. The local branch where I lived wasn't very wheelchair accessible, but he kind of thought outside the box and he said, well, there's a branch that's 20 minutes down the road that's bigger in a bigger town and is more accessible and has a disabled toilet and things like that. So he kind of spoke to the manager of the other branch and together they got me work experience. And I continued working for Lloyds Bank for a couple of years during my school holidays. And it was the first job that I put on my CV, which helped me then get my second job and my third job, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that was one of my first examples of inclusion, where the manager took a bit of a risk. He could see my potential, and then he collaborated with other managers to try and get me into the bank.
Yeah. So thank you. I think that's an excellent example of what can be done, with, as you say, with a little bit of creative thinking and inclusive thinking. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Toby, tell us a little bit more about your business now. You've come from a career in large businesses, so obviously started with Lloyds Bank, and then I know that you've worked for Deloitte, and as you said, you work for the BBC. But your business now is a consultancy working for other organisations. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I work with predominantly heads of HR, businesses that employ more than 250 people. And the main thing that I do with them is help them create their diversity and inclusion strategy and make sure that the strategy is embedded into the operations and the DNA and the culture of the organization. I suppose I work with my clients to avoid treating diversity and inclusion as this kind of activity that's done on the side or as a box ticking exercise. Because one thing I want my clients to really appreciate is that by having a diverse workplace, by having an inclusive culture, you can grow. So one of the first conversations I have with my clients is, well, how do you want to grow over the next 3 years? Are you employing loads more people? Are you developing new products and services? What are your growth plans and aspirations? And then how can a more diverse and inclusive workplace help you grow?
So can you give us maybe one or two examples of the kind of work that you've done that aligns inclusion with growth and vice versa?
Yeah, so I'll give you two examples, one from the private sector, one from the public sector, because this applies to all sectors. It's not just a commercial private sector thing. So I worked with South Yorkshire Police, and for them, growth was about representing the community that they serve, achieving better policing outcomes, which is a measurable thing for them. It's one of their key performance indicators. So we had a really powerful conversation about, well, how representative is the police force of the local community, and which members of the local community do you feel are being underserved because of a lack of diversity, a lack of representation in the force? Compared that to a fintech organization that I'm working with who are developing an app for entrepreneurs. They realize that entrepreneurs are a diverse bunch of people. Again, they are not representing the diversity of the entrepreneurial world. And they feel like if they want to get their product in front of more entrepreneurs, they need to better represent the diversity of entrepreneurs. They feel it will help them create a better product, a higher quality product that would serve their customer base.
So the fintech company that you were talking about, how would I see that, in terms of their product and the app? How would I see them actively linking inclusion to growth?
So you as a consumer would see it as a result of inclusive decisions that they make.
Mm.
So, for example, they've done a marketing campaign recently for TV. It's the first time they've advertised on TV. And they were very keen to make sure that diversity was included in that campaign. So you could see diversity in the characters on the advert. Also, in terms of how the product works as well. So, they're now thinking more about accessibility and whether that product works for people with disabilities or impairments. So if you can't see very well, or you've got manual dexterity problems in your fingers and hands using the phone and using the app. So you see it as a consumer through thousands of decisions that they make every week for their product and their service.
And how do you reach that point with a client? What kind of work do you do with a client?
I've developed a kind of a 3-stage approach, and none of this is new or rocket science. And a lot of it links back to existing business frameworks and tools out there that you can use. So the first thing that I do with my clients is that I want to create this sense of urgency around diversity and inclusion, and to make sure that it's led from the top of the business, and to make sure that those people running the business are very clear on how diversity and inclusion will help them grow or help them have a higher performing business. The first thing that we do is that we gather employee data and experiences and insights and play that back to the senior leadership team. So in practical sense, I will go into a business, I will run a diversity and inclusion census, I will do focus groups, and I will do an audit against best practice. And I will pull my findings together and present that back to the senior leadership team, which is really eye-opening for some of them.
I can imagine.
About how some of their people are feeling within the organisation.
And so, when you say eye-opening, I guess they're quite shocked at the strengths of feeling, are they sometimes?
Yeah, so sometimes there's behaviours going on in the business that they're not aware of. They don't realise is happening on their watch. Sometimes my clients feel like they've done a lot around diversity and inclusion, and that people should be feeling included. But there might be a pocket of the business where people are still not feeling very included. And that could be because there's been a particular focus on one or two groups of people. So I worked with one client, for example, who over the last 2 years has done a lot around gender balance in technology. They've done a lot around race and ethnicity. But then the survey that I did showed us that LGBT staff were not feeling particularly included. And that wasn't even on their radar. But now it is on their radar.
Yeah. So as you say, there's pockets that can surprise people, and elements of the community that, as you say, that aren't even on people's radar. I like that term, because it's almost like they're not looking in the right place.
Yeah, part of it is just about bringing stuff into the senior leadership team's awareness. And that's the process that I go through with my clients. First of all, it's like, let's bring stuff into your awareness so you know what you're dealing with, what's going on. Because once we know what's going on, we will be in a much better position to then create a strategy that gets into the DNA of your organization. Without that employee data or insights, you run the very high risk of developing a strategy that might perpetuate some problems, that might not address problems that are existing in the organisation.
And how do you convince those that might need convincing that inclusion is directly connected with growth?
So one of the first things that I do is I get my clients to understand for themselves what growth is for their business and how they want to grow. And then through coaching conversations, get them to understand how increased diversity and inclusion will help them achieve that growth. But it's unique for every business. And this is the point that I make to all of my clients, that you can go online and you can Google what is the business case for diversity and inclusion. And you can get loads of interesting blog articles, and you can read the things like the McKinsey report, which talks about how gender balance on the board gives you X% increase in financial performance of an organization. But it's all very generic. So you need to come up with your own unique business case for your business.
And you mentioned coaching conversations, and I believe you had some coach training in the past. Is that right?
I have, yeah. Yeah. So when I was at the BBC, I was a project manager, and we had a very kind of coach-like way of managing our software development teams through using agile software development methodologies and processes. And that's how I started off my training as a coach.
And now, if I've understood you right, you use those skills to facilitate sometimes difficult conversations with clients?
I do. I mean, not just difficult conversations, but just conversations around diversity and inclusion in a business. Because if I can ask coaching questions, then I think that my clients have a better understanding of what's going on in their organization, and they can apply diversity and inclusion a lot more effectively to their organization as well.
And I assume you also use coaching skills when you do the focus groups.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And do you, with your consultancy to support the changes that you help clients make, do you also use other coaches, or is it something that that you yourself tend to focus on?
Yeah, I tend to focus on it myself, but I do have a team of people that I bring in to help me as and when necessary. Some of the other consultants that I work with are also, coach trained. And I think it's something that a lot of diversity and inclusion consultants that I know are trained in as well, because it's a very effective way of working with clients and organizations.
Whilst we're on the subject of coaching, have you received coaching yourself? Have you been coached?
Yeah, I've had tons of coaching. Yeah. Yeah.
What is your experience of coaching? Do you think coaching itself or the coaching industry is inclusive?
I think to be on the receiving end of coaching, it has to be inclusive, because one of the cornerstones of coaching really is to kind of accept the client for how they present themselves to you. And then to ask lots of coaching, like open questions, to really get to the core of a client's challenges or issues. And that's a very inclusive way of working. I think, coaches themselves are prone to all of the things that as human beings that we're prone to. So, coaches are still prone to unconscious bias. They still feel the effects of privilege, for example, and they still may demonstrate microaggressions. And I think it's important for coaches to have an awareness of inclusion in their work and some of the things that can lead to exclusion.
Yeah. And can you expand on that a little? Is there something that you would really like our listeners to understand?
Yeah, so I've just mentioned bias, privilege, and microaggressions. So if we look at bias, for example, by being human, and as the product of social conditioning, we have our biases. Basically, we have preferences. That's a product of partly the way that our brains are designed, and the wiring in our brains, but also the product of social conditioning, what we're exposed to growing up. Now, I like to use the Neuro Leadership Institute's framework model when I'm talking about bias, which is called SEEDS. It's an acronym for 5 different types of bias. The first one, S, stands for similarity bias, which basically says that we have a preference for people like us rather than people that we perceive to be different to us. And we create in-groups and out-groups. Now, as a coach, you might feel like it's easier to build rapport with people that are just like us. And we know that whenever we strike up a new or a coaching relationship, that we have to have rapport with that person. So being aware of that, being aware that if you're coaching somebody who on an unconscious level feels different to you, comes from a different background to you, that you might have to take a few more steps to build that rapport. Yeah, so S is for similarity. So after similarity bias, we've got experience bias. Experience bias basically says that we take our perceptions to be the objective truth.
Right.
This comes up a lot in sort of creative situations. You might hear people say things like, "Oh, we tried that before. It didn't work.
Yeah.
We won't try that again." Or that's just not the way that we do things around here. If you ever hear phrases like that, we know that experience bias is at play. Then we have expedience bias, which states that we have a preference for getting things done quickly rather than take our time. We take shortcuts. And we're particularly prone to expedience bias when we're working under high cognitive load or stress.
Right.
So this comes up quite a lot, I find, in decision making for team leaders. If you've got a really busy team leader working under a lot of stress, they might just give tasks to somebody on the team that they know can get the job done quickly with minimal supervision. But that means that you might be overlooking somebody who needs an opportunity to cut their teeth on a task to help develop their career, for instance. Or you might respond to an email in haste and forget some really important information. So that's expedience bias. Distance bias says that we have a preference for what is closest to us in time and space rather than far away. We find this quite a lot happening where you've got teams distributed around the country, around the world. There might be more of a focus on the people that are closest to you. This could come up in job interviews. If you do half of the interviews online and half of them face-to-face, again, you might have a preference for people that you meet in person.
Yeah, good point.
Because you've spent more time with them and they've been closest to you. And then safety bias basically says that we have a preference for wanting to protect ourselves against losses more than seek out the gains. This really links to the sunk cost fallacy, which says that if we spend a lot of time and money and energy on something and that project or thing isn't going anywhere or it's failing, then we psychologically want to put more time, more money and energy into it to salvage it rather than cut our losses.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really interesting model.
Yeah.
Thank you for going through it. There's lots of moments as you were speaking where I was thinking, okay. Yeah, I think I've been there and I've been in that, especially the expediency bias.
Yeah.
I know in the past, where I've done things because it felt the most efficient or, as the word says, the most expedient.
Yeah.
And to the detriment of including others.
Yeah.
I'm sure that I've done that.
Yeah. It's very natural. We all have our biases because it's just we are the product of social conditioning. The TV programs that you watched, the books that you've read, what's in the media, what parents and teachers have told us, what politicians are telling us, that all shapes our biases.
A really useful model. Do you use other models in your work?
I use tons of models. I mean, when it comes to bias, I prefer the SEEDS model because it looks at bias in decision making rather than against or towards particular groups of people, which I don't think is very helpful. I think people mislabel themselves. Doesn't create the right learning environment. But I use loads. I mean, for example, I talk with my clients how to embed change within their organization. And I use John Cotter's framework, the 7 or 8 steps of implementing change. And the process that I described earlier is really linked to the first 3 steps of his model about creating a sense of urgency, about building a coalition to lead the change, and then to set out a vision for your change, which should be led from the top of the business and the chief executive.
It's a great model, that. I use that in my teaching too. It's one of those lovely models, isn't it? That's dead easy to explain and dead easy to pick up, and then people can just run with it. What about your own work? I know you've written a book, haven't you? Inclusive Growth.
I have, yeah.
Do you sort of distill your own work into a model that is a kind of lens through which people can easily access it?
Yeah, I have. So I've developed my inclusive growth model, which contains 7 key best practices for sustainable change. And that's divided into 3 sections.
And so can you tell us about the 3 sections and then we can go into the detail a little bit more?
Yeah, so we've got establish, embed, and enhance. So established contains 2 C's. They all begin with C. So we've got clarity and culture. So with embed, first of all, we need clarity on why diversity and inclusion is important to the growth of the business, i.e., what is your individual unique business case for your organization, and also what employee data and insights can we get our hands on to help us develop a strategy. Then we move on to culture. It really kind of says that for this to work, we have to have a focus on culture. There was a leading management consultant who said culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
I suppose what I talk to my clients about is really that culture is the sum of our day-to-day behaviours. So, what inclusive leadership behaviours are your senior leadership team demonstrating, and how are they setting the tone for the rest of the organisation? And how, as an organisation, do you want to shift your culture to become more inclusive, so that when people show up to work in the morning, they show up to an organisation where they feel like they belong and that they can progress and that they feel empowered to do their best work.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree more about culture. I love the way you put it. Culture is the sum of our day-to-day behaviours.
Yeah.
Because that, to me, that's a very visual statement. I'm just immediately imagining people working together and going about their ordinary business. And within that activity, they're creating whatever the work culture is.
Yeah.
I'm also really interested in what you're saying about clarity. And I liked it when you said something about uniqueness, that every company you work with has a unique proposition here about inclusion. Can you expand on that a little bit?
It really relates to what I said earlier about trying to understand how you want to grow as a business and how diversity and inclusion will help you achieve that growth. Because when I worked with South Yorkshire Police, for example, who were interested in better policing outcomes, reflecting their community, better relationships with what they termed underserved members of their community, that's a very unique proposition to this fintech organization that I'm working with, who is developing a banking app that wants to distribute the app globally and recruit loads more entrepreneurs to use their software. But each of those organizations in common can achieve those goals by being more inclusive.
Yeah, I think that's really so important, and to me that is the nub of your work, as I've learnt about it this morning. Diversity and inclusion isn't a one size fits all solution, is it?
No, it really isn't. I mean, there are common principles, and that's why I put them in the book. So after clarity and culture, we then go into the second section, which is embedding, because this is where we have to get it into the DNA of your business. And the next C is change. So making sure that you've got proper change management in place. Like, one of the biggest frustrations that a lot of organizations that I talk to have is that they don't feel like they're making an impact when it comes to diversity and inclusion. They're not seeing the needle shift.
Right.
And that's in a lot of cases because they don't have proper change management in place. So they haven't mapped out their stakeholders. They don't have a delivery roadmap. They haven't really determined what success looks like and how they're measuring success. They haven't set SMART goals for themselves. All of that good stuff that we do in change management is missing when it comes to D&I. So I talk about the importance of having proper change management. We then go on to the next C, which is colleague experience and design. And this is all about those employee experiences, thinking about journeys that people go on in an organization, and then removing any obstacles that will prevent somebody from completing that journey.
Okay.
So if we took, for example, your recruitment process, what are the things that are going to get in people's ways? Do you have a careers website that doesn't work with assistive technology? So somebody who's blind, for example, can't apply to work for you because their screen read doesn't work very well on your website. Do you insist on having face-to-face interviews, which might be difficult for some people? That kind of thing. Do you talk openly in your recruitment materials that you welcome conversations about flexible working, so that people feel like they can have a flexible working job with you? So all of these things can create inclusive or exclusive journeys for people. And then the third C in this section is cyber. And it's about how technology can either exclude people because it's not being accessible. So you could have a learning management system in your business that has videos, training videos, that doesn't have subtitles.
Good point. Yeah.
So, how can somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing, or where English is a second language, understand that training? And also the other side of cyber or technology is how technology can help you accelerate what you're doing around diversity and inclusion. There's so many apps and software out there now that can help you, that, for example, that can analyze the language that you're using in job descriptions to see if that's inclusive language or not.
Interesting. I didn't know those apps existed, so that's amazing.
Yeah, there's tons of apps out there now.
Yeah.
So we've got a final two,
Mm.
which is really where you put the icing on the cake. The final two is collaboration and celebration. And collaboration is all about how you can work as a whole organization rather than the HR department taking the lead on diversity and inclusion, because it really is the responsibility of every department in your business, from marketing to procurement to the people that run your offices to the HR department that have to take responsibility for D&I. And then celebration is really all about how you can then project yourself out to the market as an inclusive place to work. You know, how you create and define your inclusive employee value proposition so that you can attract the best and diverse talent going forwards.
Oh, that's really interesting that the notion of celebration is actually the external face of the organisation. I was imagining it would be some kind of internal celebration of, oh, haven't we done really well with our D&I agenda? But actually, it's about the external face, which links to the sustainability element, doesn't it? It's organisations have to continue the work. It's not done, is it? I think is what I'm trying to say. The work is not done.
It's never done. Diversity and inclusion is not a project. It's a way of being. It's like health and safety. And diversity and inclusion hasn't yet reached the level of maturity that health and safety has. When it comes to health and safety, everybody knows their responsibilities. Everybody knows what they need to do to minimize risk, to create a safe working environment for themselves and their colleagues. But there's not that level of understanding when it comes to creating an inclusive place to work for a lot of people. For a lot of people, going to work is still an uncomfortable and sometimes dangerous experience. That's the reason why I do this work. I don't want people to go to work and feel in danger and feel that they can't be themselves at work.
That would be a really good place to sort of underline and complete our conversation. Thank you for making that point. So, Toby, I know that there will be listeners that will be interested in contacting you, connecting with you. So how could people do that?
So people can understand more about my work, and if they want to research the inclusive growth framework that I've created, the best place to go is my website, which is mildon.co.uk. But also, I spend loads of time on LinkedIn. So if people want to chat with me, probably the best way is either message me through my website, or anyone's welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn and strike up a conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Toby. I've learned loads and I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. So thank you for taking the time to speak to us at the Association for Coaching, and wish you well for your work in the future.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. I've been Alex Morgan. Our purpose is to inspire and champion coaching excellence to advance the coaching profession and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and in turn society. If you'd like to find out more, please follow us on LinkedIn and explore our webpage at theassociationforcoaching.com. There you can keep up to date with our latest episodes and conversations, as well as our digital learning calendar.